ahead and touch my face now and get that out of the way,
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. Beautiful day in Pennsylvania, Saturday. So I really appreciate everyone that's here, or if you're watching this afterwards. But I got a good show today. I got a guest lined up, my friend Billy Allred. He's going to talk about an incident that he had, a fellow Pennsylvanian who I think also shares some disdain with our esteemed governor's choices in this lockdown. So it has a very interesting story to tell us about it. So I was really thankful to have him on today. So thanks for being here, Billy. It's great to see you.
Great to see you, Rob. It's been a few months.
Yeah, we met when I ran for Congress in the special election in 2019, and you really helped me out a lot with that. So I'm still really appreciative for that. So thank you so much for that.
Well, you did a fantastic job. Everyone loved your speeches at the conference. So it was a pleasant, memorable time for us all, I think.
Well, thank you. So why don't you tell us just a little about yourself, and then what led to you wanting to discuss the lockdown with Governor Wolf?
Sure. Yeah. Well, personally, I'm a dad and a husband. I'm father to 4 wonderful children, 2 of whom are in college. One's graduated from high school and working in a technical position, and then I have a junior in high school that's left. We homeschooled all of our kids. And they've turned out to be a wonderful decision, both for us while we were doing that, but also in terms of how well they're doing post-graduation. We're really pleased. So I've been involved in politics for a while. Back in 2008, I got involved in politics when I came across information from the Ron Paul campaign that changed my mind about a lot of things liberty-wise. And so that sort of touched off a level of involvement that I had not seen before in my life. And I ran for township supervisor and was elected back in 2010. I also got appointed to the Republican County Committee in my county and have been there ever since. I'm currently vice chair of the Union County Republican Committee. And just trying to keep liberty issues at the forefront, constitutional government. I have a lot of disagreements with the Republican Party.
Me too.
But we have a real conservative party here in Union County, and the benefit of that is that we have some freedom to disagree with the establishment, and that's not the case in every county.
Right.
I know you found out, but that's the way it is here. So,
for those
background.
Yeah, for those listening, Union County, it's more of a rural county. It's like towards the center of Pennsylvania. Could you just real quickly explain how, because I think when people think of Pennsylvania, if you're not from here, you kind of think of Philly and Pittsburgh and then the rest of the state. So Union County's a rural kind of area in the center of the state.
Yeah, so we're about halfway between Williamsport and Harrisburg. We have a county of about 45,000 people. My township is about 1,500 people and about 22 miles of road. So, yeah, it's fairly rural. But we're not out in the sticks. I'm about 10 minutes each from a couple of Walmarts and a couple of Weis Markets and a couple of Giants. So we're not totally in the middle of nowhere.
So what led you to wanting to discuss things with Governor Wolf? What was your initial reaction, I guess, to the lockdown?
Yeah, so initially, let me say this. I come from a background, especially through my political action and seeing the corruption in both parties. Even during that conferee process, I think there's things you learned and saw in there that you probably never envisioned or imagined before.
That's right. Yep.
But coming with that background, I come from a background of not trusting the government. Just because the government says something, I don't take it at face value. Right. I research it and try to get a background myself. So when all of this started happening, I was skeptical. And it was through part of that skepticism that I approached, okay, well, what's a reasonable way to approach this? And I always come from a concept of liberty.
Right.
We give people the best information we can and let them make the choices rather than raining down force upon them. Well, when the governor issued these stay-at-home orders for the whole state, that really incensed me, and it incensed me both as a citizen, but also because as in his original order, he said that municipal officials were, such as myself, were going to be used to help
That's right.
enforce these orders. So I wrote a press release right away that when those were issued and said, number one, I believe these to be unlawful based on my reading, not only of the Constitution and the Pennsylvania Constitution, but also of the laws that govern disasters, and then another law that governs pandemics. So I said, number one, these are unlawful, and number two, my allegiance is to the Constitution.
Right.
I publicly now refuse to be any part of enforcement of these orders. And fortunately, my local representative, who I'm good friends with, David Rowe, he he also was making some similar statements about the broad brush approach. And our representative Fred Keller, whom you lost to in that conferee process, and but he also was taking a pretty active approach, which I was glad about. So there was a newspaper article, that quoted all three of us about that. So that sort of set the stage for, hey, we're not necessarily just going to go along with this. And then as things developed, I went to the rally, on the 20th, I think, in Harrisburg, with about what seemed like about 3,000 people to me, and was active on the Facebook sites that were discussing those issues. And I've been pretty active on Facebook as well, trying to bring things up and tell the truth about various things. Because I have a bit of a following. I ran for commissioner here last year. And so after the rally, when I got home from the rally on the 20th, I said, I posted on the Reopen PA site, I'm like, okay, what's next? Because you can't allow these events to just be like one and done. Like, right. Okay, we did something and now we're done. No, you need to keep the pressure on. So I'm like, obviously the legislature is not really the proper target for our angst about all of this and our anger about all of this. It's actually the governor.
Right.
Not that they couldn't do more, but it's ultimately on him. So we need to go to the governor's mansion and the governor's house, because he's not going to his office anymore. And, a lot of people said, yeah, let's do it. But unfortunately, and this, most people, they're willing to be the second person off the sidewalk or the third person. They're not the first person to step into traffic.
That's exactly right. And that's not only true of just us in general as the general population, but that's definitely true politically when it comes to leadership. And I think that you see that all around the country. The best people I've seen are local people, people involved in local government that are willing to say, look, for me, it's not a career. I'm doing what I someone like you ran for local office, not because it was like, oh, I can't wait to, get the riches that come with being a local office.
$150 a month.
Right. And so then it's easier to act on your principles. Whereas it seems like the higher up you get in government, everyone's looking around like, even if they secretly think, hey, I'm against these lockdowns, they're waiting for someone else to be the face of that. So I totally agree. And the other thing I want to say real quick, you're absolutely right about Wolf's initial response. Remember, initially in early March, Wolf also was publicly saying that they weren't going to have a one-size-fits-all approach, that they were going to be involved with local government and county government to be able to see how many cases were occurring in each county to determine what would be appropriate for each county. Like we said previously, Union County is going to be far different than Allegheny County, where Pittsburgh's at, or Philadelphia, the counties in Philadelphia. But they went back on their word. They did the exact opposite. And I'm guessing they didn't, even as you said that you would refuse to enforce unconstitutional declarations by Governor Wolf, I bet they didn't contact you anyways. They had these bold claims, we're going to be involved with local officials, and yet every local official I've talked to is like, we haven't heard word one from them.
Oh, no, and I've talked to the emergency manager of Union County. I've talked to 2 of the 3 commissioners. That's absolutely true.
Right. And the other thing is, it's not just government. It's not just officials that they're not talking to. Look at hospitals. I've talked to hospitals in my kind of rural areas. They're just getting a one size fits all declaration like weekly from Governor Wolf's office, whereas it makes no sense to me. My brother's on here in the chat right now. He had a medical emergency, goes to one of these local hospitals, and they're basically ushering him out the door, which caused more problems for him because they're getting the same advice to deal with COVID that inner city hospitals are. So for me, this was a failure from, even if you could say, okay, I could suspend my belief that this was illegal and unconstitutional at the state and federal level, they still botched it beyond just the legality of it, where it doesn't make sense even effectually because they're not communicating with people. They're engaged in a one-size-fits-all approach. So, yeah, I'm glad that, you took leadership on doing it. So you're going to tell us now exactly how you went to Wolf's Mansion then.
Yeah, so after the 20th, it's like, okay, nobody seems to be stepping off the sidewalk here. So on Friday night, last Friday night, I put out a post on a couple of the sites and I said, hey, I'm going to Governor Wolf's house tomorrow. Who's joining me? And, I got maybe 50, 60, 70 likes. A couple people said, hey, yeah, we'll see you there. And, but I'm like, okay, well, hopefully people are protesting, because if I had lost my job in this, and by the way, I didn't, we can go into that later if you want. But
Right.
so I'm thinking, okay, if I'd lost my job, I'd definitely be protesting basically every day of the week.
Right.
And so I drive down past the governor's mansion, past the Capitol. This is Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. Nobody. There's nobody protesting. This is a week ago. So I get down to the governor's house. I drive down the street where his personal home is. Nobody. So I've been involved a little bit in protests before, as you might imagine, and things like that. And knowing that there was going to be a security force around and that they love to harass people, I parked away from his house because, they use your car against you a lot of times, and your registration and your inspection, and they use it to find things to
Right.
hassle you about. So I parked about a block away, and I walked to the governor's house with my sign, a little sign that said, let's see, reopen, or no, what was it? It was reopen PA now, I think. It was end this lockdown. I'm sorry. It was end this lockdown. And then on the other side, it said, every wage is a life sustaining wage. And I walked down the sidewalk, the public sidewalk, and no one jumped out. No one said anything. So I just thought, hey, I'm just going to walk up to the guy's house. There's no gate around his house, no fence, no trespassing signs, no warning, the governor lives here signs, nothing like that. So I start up the sidewalk towards his house, intending to ring the doorbell and see who answers. And I get about 2/3 of the way up the sidewalk, and I hear a voice behind me, and there was a dark windowed vehicle across the street that had been parked there the whole time. And a guy ends up jumping out of that, and he runs over to me, and he's just in plain clothes, and he says to me, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm going up to talk to the governor." And he said, "You can't do that." And I said, "Why not? He lives here."
Right.
And he said, "Because you're trespassing." And I said, "I don't see any signs that say no trespassing. And my understanding of the law is that I can go up and knock on anybody's door.
Sure.
They don't have a posted sign or a no trespassing sign." And he's like, "Well, I'm telling you, you can't." I said, "Well, who are you? I don't know who you are."
Right.
And so at that point, he pulls his vest back and he shows me a badge that's on his belt, and that he's with the Pennsylvania State Police and part of the security team. And I'm like, "Oh, okay, well, that's perfectly fine. I understand." And fortunately, that probably would have been the end of it. But by this time, a couple other officers had come running out of an adjacent building, and both in plain clothes as well. And the governor must have been looking out his window. Probably the security cameras picked me up or something. And so he comes out the back door and he yells over to them, "Is everything okay?" And so I yelled to him. I'm like, "Governor Wolf, my name's Billy Allred, Township Supervisor, Union Township, Union County, and I really would like to talk to you about the lockdown and the waiver process. Just a few minutes. Do you have time to talk to me for a few minutes?" And he says, "Yeah, let me get a mask on. I'll come back out." So at that point, he goes back in. I look at the officer, and the officer doesn't ask me for ID or anything. He just says, "You have a mask," and I said, "Yep, I have a mask, and I'll gladly put it on." And I'm like, "If you would like to frisk me, I'm willing to be frisked.
Right.
I respect your right to protect the governor, what you're doing here. So feel free to frisk me." He's like, "No, that's not necessary." So I walked up to within about 12 feet of the governor, and we started having a conversation, which lasted about 7 minutes. I had my phone in my hand, and I recorded the conversation. I placed it on Facebook and posted it a couple places. But
I'll get a link up to that, by the way, by
yeah,
tomorrow. So yeah,
sure, yeah. So anyway, and I'm going by memory from this. So
sure.
if anybody listens to the audio, please understand. I'm trying to remember what happened a week ago. But anyway, so the main the main thing that I wanted to talk to him about was the waiver process
Right.
and discrepancy in the waiver process. And the reason why is not because I think that's the most important thing. To me, for instance, the right to life, it trumps the waiver process.
Sure.
And if the governor and I were sitting down having a conversation, I'd want to talk about abortion,
Right.
frankly, more so than the waiver process. But I knew I had this moment in time, right? You get 7 minutes with the governor, and you got to capture his attention and not have him dismiss you. So what I did was I told him a story, and it was a real story. It actually happened. My brother-in-law owns some Airbnbs here in Union County and around this area, and he was hosting a couple different classes of people during this crisis. One was there were some emergency service workers, hospital employees, that kind of thing, who did not want to go back to their homes in between shifts and risk spreading this virus
To
to
the
their
family. Yeah.
families. So they wanted basically a crash place. So he was getting requests for that, and then he was also getting requests for some folks who had families who were in the hospital. They were from more rural areas. One was from about an hour and a half away. Their husband was in the hospital, and it wasn't for COVID. It was for something else, but they needed to be basically available at the hospital because it was a dire situation. They couldn't be going back and forth, 2-hour drive each way every time a decision needed to be made or somebody needed to be checked. So I thought these were reasonable reasons why the Airbnb waiver could be granted, especially when the reason they shut down the Airbnbs was, from my understanding, is they said the Airbnbs in Monroe County, which is far eastern Pennsylvania, were advertising to New Yorkers, "Hey, come here and escape COVID."
Okay.
So I kind of understand that's why they did it. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I think it's more legitimate than some of the
Sure.
decisions
Sure.
that they've made. So I thought, I'll I'll help my brother-in-law get this waiver. So I submitted, and I'm a business person. I know how to write a waiver request
Right.
and include proper information with proper grammar and
Which,
English and all of that. So
which, by the way, real quick, that's something. Your small business loans during this, your waivers. A lot of people have no idea how to do that process. It's actually
right.
a really sad thing that a lot of people that maybe could have applied for a waiver or a small business loan, they're just totally clueless. So, just another
Absolutely.
unfortunate side effect of things going on.
Yeah, and he didn't know how to do this.
Right.
But he's an over-the-road truck driver that just does Airbnb on the side. So, he can't like stop his truck and learn all about the waiver
Sure.
process. And that's why I said, yeah, I'll help you with one. So we submit it, and like 6 days later, we get a letter that says, "Your waiver has been denied because you are part of residential construction. And all residential construction has been shut down in Pennsylvania." And I'm just like amazed. I'm shaking my head. They're not dealing with the facts that were presented in the waiver request. They're not even dealing with the facts of what an Airbnb is. And
Right.
I said Airbnb like 4 times in the application. It's pretty clear.
Yeah, and that's not a small company. That's something that's in
No,
the
everybody knows what
lexicon,
that is.
right? Like that's
Right.
public knowledge at this point. Yeah.
Yes. So here's the ironic thing, and this is why I wanted to tell the governor this story, is that he got a letter last week that says, "Hey, you're allowed to reopen your Airbnb because it's part of residential construction." And we've allowed, and as of May 1st, we're opening residential construction. So not only was he shut down for an invalid reason, or denied a waiver, I should say, but now he's allowed to open because he's been misclassified. And I thought that story really illustrated a major breakdown in the whole waiver
Exactly.
process. And that's why, and I thought this is something that Governor Wolf, I can say this in 2 minutes and he'll get it. Anybody will get it.
Right.
And and I can call for transparency in it. And so that's what I did. And he sort of acted like he got it, but it was like, yeah, but it's been really complicated, and here's why we closed the Airbnbs. No, 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 Governor, you're missing my point.
Right.
It isn't about the Airbnbs. This is about a waiver process that's not transparent, and it's you can't get through, and you hear back 7 days later, and it's a major mess up. So
Yeah, and let me just say real quick, I think something you're absolutely, it's fantastic that you made this point to him, because one of the things that I think people are losing sight of is so many people on my side that wants the lockdown to end, they feel like, okay, once the lockdown ends, we got what we want and then life could go back. But that's not the case. And it's not just a matter of me wanting Governor Wolf to do policies that I agree with. They should also have to explain themselves. So I know when I was talking to you on the phone, one of the things I said was, look, they originally came out and said, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. Then they switched a week later and says, okay, it's going to be one-size-fits-all. Then the week before the rally that you went to in Harrisburg, they were asked by my friend Todd Bartley, a reporter out of Williamsport, they were asked, Wolf's team was asked, what do you say to small business owners in places like Sullivan County or Union County, other places where there's hardly any cases? They said, we can't open them up because the virus is already there, and if we opened it up, it would be a disaster. Then you all had your rally, and all of a sudden the next week, after a show of support for opening, now Tom Wolf's like, okay, we're going to start May 8th. We'll start a process to reopen some of these counties. Now, I think that Wolf and the people that are in charge of this should have to answer what changed from before the rally, when you said it would be the worst thing to have these small counties, it would cause all this death and destruction if we opened up these small counties, to then just 3 days later saying, no, you could open them up. And it's the same with this waiver process. One of the things that's problematic is, again, it's not just that I think that it was unconstitutional what they did. It's that even if we cross that threshold, they were incompetent beyond that. And you could see it exactly what you're saying with this waiver process, where you constantly get these mixed message. There's no transparency. There's no communication with local leaders. There's no communication with the average Pennsylvanian. And and by the way, that's playing out in state by state. That's playing out in the federal government. So many people just make it this question of, okay, well, May 8th, the lockdown ends in my county, therefore everything's back to normal. That is not the case. And if we don't hold them accountable for their mixed messages, their lack of transparency, even when they're doing what we want, we're going to see this occur over and over again. If a couple hundred people die in a particular county, they'll shut it down, And so I think that that's a great point that you made, kind of showing how absurd and lack of transparency that they have with even that waiver process.
correct, yeah, and that was really the point. If you speak to the absurdity of something in real terms that someone can understand easily and deal with, you hope that they'll say, "Oh, yeah, that is a problem. I can understand how I can understand how you're looking at this, and we got to fix this." But there was even my appeal to that absurdity didn't really get me anywhere. I mean, he was respectful, and I think anybody that listens to the audio will realize that I was respectful. I mean,
Right.
I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. I spoke to him in an even tone. I wasn't yelling at him. I respect his position as the governor. I think we need a governor. I'm not anti-government, but we need transparency in governance, and we need laws and orders that abide by our Constitution and all of that. So that was the basis. But then, I went from the waiver process on to, okay, this broad brush thing. Look, I'm from Union County. We have 30 cases. We have no deaths. I understand why you did what you did in Philadelphia County, but why are you doing it in Union County, and why haven't you stopped? I said one of the things we were told from this during this whole time is that uh, the curve was going to peak at different times in different places.
Right.
But I said if you actually look at the numbers, Philadelphia County is plateauing now, but so are we, even though we were 3 weeks behind them. We're plateauing at 30 cases, and they're plateauing at whatever it is now. I don't know, several thousand cases. Um, and he acknowledged that, which I was really surprised to hear him say that. He said, "You're right," and then he said something that was totally surprising to me and revealing. He said we believe we don't know for sure, but we believe that the social distancing is having a real effect. And I just thought, wow, to get someone at this high of a position who's taking this kind of a draconian approach to the state of Pennsylvania with a broad brush to actually say, we don't know 100% sure that this is even having an effect on stemming the tide of the virus, is an amazing admittance, because I've been saying for quite a while, I don't think that we need, correlation does not equal
That's right.
causation. We don't know for sure that all of these things are having the effect we're being told they're having, nor do we know which ones are. Is it the hand washing that's having an effect?
Right.
Is it the masks? Is it the separation? Is it the lack of social groups? Is it the restaurants closing? Is it everything together, or is it a few things? All of these things are questions. But it was, again, he at that point he went to, you just need to wait. Okay, you just need to wait 2 more weeks. Just wait 2 more weeks. You just need to be patient.
And I had a family member who was someone who was deemed non-essential. And so they, for the first time in 15, 20 years, had to apply for unemployment. And they were denied for no reason, so they had to appeal it. So you call in the number. One of his coworkers called and documented this 430 something times, got a busy signal over and over and over. So when you called our local representative, they told my family member, be patient. You have to be patient. First, they said, leave a message and they'll call you back. And my family member said, it's just a busy tone. There's no message. And they said, well, you need to be patient. And my family member said, well, it's easy for you to say. I don't have money. I'm trying to put food on the table, and that's how, when you hear these leaders saying, I'll be patient, I would be respectful as you were, and I wouldn't, I would say this in a respectful way, but that's very rude. It's very inconsiderate to tell people that are losing their livelihood to be patient. And the other thing I'll say is, look, this is what again, Pennsylvania is a microcosm of not just the United States, but the world in general. Remember, the big study that led to a lot of these lockdowns was the Imperial College study out of Britain that said famously 2.2 million Americans would die, 500,000 Brits would die. Britain engaged in the lockdown. 2 days later, the Imperial College went from 500,000 to 20,000. Now that's obviously them just pulling numbers out. That's basically them saying, everybody's going to die unless you give away all your rights and give us all the money, and then no one will die. That's basically what they're saying. And the problem is, even they've admitted, and Wolf's admitted this in his press conferences, and his teams admitted this, and Trump's teams admitted it, no one knows. They said, well, we were just guessing. It was just an educated guess based on looking at Italy, and we're just guessing if social distancing can solve. My question is, when did it become the default position of, we don't know, so take away your rights and collapse the economy? If you don't know, then you say, we'll take the... See, because what it is you know that the actions that you're taking are a violation of rights. You know that the actions you're taking will collapse the economy. So why would you take those known disasters for something that you're not sure of? And that's what's boggled my mind. Even the people that, I think you could be in good faith and say, I was concerned about this disease, so I was for some sort of lockdown. I disagree with those people, but fair enough. We could have that argument. But what blows my mind is, but if you're not certain, how could you advocate? I mean, because another thing with the lack of transparency, and if you followed my channel, what I've said the entire time is, all I wanted before I allow the government to take away these rights and collapse the economy is to answer these basic questions. If they don't have to answer those questions, which they didn't, who's to say next year, you remember the West Nile virus? It ended up not killing that. But I remember there were reports West Nile is going to be devastating. So who's to say next year there's not another West Nile? How does the exact same logic that shut down under COVID not shut us down over West Nile? Well, we're not sure, but we better lock down just in case. And that is what has the potential to destroy this country. If we set this precedent that in the name of fear, anytime there's an unknown, our gut reaction is going to be take away people's rights, shut down the economy. And I don't see how every argument that Wolf's made, that even Trump and his team have made, how it doesn't lead to these disasters in the future where, we've switched the criteria. It used to be before you take away people's rights, you have to know that it'll be effective. You have to know that there's a big emergency. Now it's the exact opposite. We don't know. They admit it. They all admit. We don't know how bad the virus would have been. We don't know for sure that social distancing will help. But we're going to default to take away the rights anytime there's an unknown.
Yeah. Well, and I think a big part of that, too, is that in the future, now that they've done it once, that's going to continue to be the default position. And that's why I think your point about once you're issued, once you're moved from red to yellow, for instance, doesn't mean this is over.
Right.
We need to continue to be asking questions and challenging this, because if we don't, it's just going to happen again and again. They never underestimate the idea of the consent of the governed. If they don't have buy-in, they cannot even arrest 1% of the population.
Right.
Much less 10% or 20% or 30%. So and that's why some of these things I think are couched in order, they don't use they use a lot of suggestive language, not sexually suggestive, but
right.
Like they're suggesting things, strongly suggesting things. And they use mixed language to try to just basically convince you to comply rather than order you to, because they know if it comes down to orders and enough people disobey, the system will collapse on itself.
Right, and that's why I'm someone who supported Trump. In fact, people that watch my channel know this. I was this close to accepting a job with Trump's team in Pennsylvania here. But there were problems with my social media account, so I couldn't do it. But I'm glad I didn't, because if I was working for him, it might have been hard to criticize the decisions that he's made, which I think there's a lot to criticize. But one of the things that Trump supporters that are for kind of the actions that Trump's taken that we've kind of been discussing is kind of the idea of, if you're willing to accept it when your guy does it, then you've basically already lost the battle. You should question, no matter what side's doing this idea. Correct. And it is your consent that allows them to have this sort of power. Look, I'm honestly somewhat pessimistic. Like you said, enough people were fired up on Facebook, right? Enough people were fired up. You talk to your neighbors. How many people showed up with you? Yeah. And that's, I tried to talk to local business leaders that I know, owners in my area, and said, all of you open up. Just do it. They can't arrest you all. If one of you does it, they can arrest you. If you all open up, what are they going to do? Is Governor Wolf want that to be the video that's circulating? State troopers coming through my town and arresting, 15 business owners? Is that what he wants? I mean, I have stories, like just a quick story I could tell you. I've heard that a business owner that owns a bar restaurant was telling some friends of mine that the LCB, the Liquor Control Board, sits outside of his bar almost every day to make sure that he doesn't have people coming in. And he didn't know who this person was. He just saw them sitting in a car. Well, his business doesn't open until like 4 o'clock. So he saw someone sitting in the car and it's 3. And he just approached the window and said, hey, we don't open until 4 because all they could do is take out food orders now. And the person said, oh, no, I'm not I'm not a client. I'm from the state to make sure that you're complying with these orders. Now, it's that type of thing that lets you know this isn't all in good faith. There's more that's going on. There is an exploitive issue of power and control that's along with it. It's not just about keeping us safe. And you can see it all over the place where little videos of, these police that are being ordered to go out and arrest someone who had a wedding at their house, or the going into a church and arresting people, or sending the Liquor Control Board out to make sure that local businesses aren't having people. And at the same time, you hear stories of, well, they're telling the police in Philly, don't arrest burglars anymore. We're more concerned with the people opening the business than the people trying to rob the business,
Right. Well, and that's actually a good segue because I had, the second half of this story is the interaction I had with the state police and the security team afterward. So let me catch you up then on the next on phase
Yeah.
two, right? So the governor and I end this conversation very peacefully. He thanks me for coming. I thank him for his time, and we start to walk back towards the public sidewalk. He goes into his house. Officer number one, who is the same officer that came up behind me as I was approaching the
Hmm.
house in the beginning, he says to me, "Thank you for being respectful to the governor." And I said, "Well, thank you for being respectful to me. I really appreciate it." And we get back over to the sidewalk, and officer number two is standing on the sidewalk waiting for us. And as we get there, officer number one says to me, "Can I see your ID? Could I have a look at your ID?" And I'm like, "No, I already identified myself. I gave my name and that. I
And
don't
you're
think that's
leaving at that point.
right." And he's like, "Well, no, yeah, it's not necessary, but we just like to ask." And then officer number two decides he doesn't like my answer. So he proceeds to tell me that actually it is necessary and that I am required to show it. And that the reason I'm required to show it is that I would be required to show it in a traffic stop. And then, as if he realizes the idiocy of what he's saying, he says to me, "How'd you get here anyway? How'd you get here from Union County? You must have drove down here. Where's your car?" Because he knows that if I'm driving, if I get out of a car, they are allowed to ask
Right.
me for my license and registration. But if I'm just walking down the street, they're not. So, he starts playing this game and being really aggressive and bullying me. And he says, "You need to leave now. You need to leave." And I said, "I'm on the public sidewalk." And he said, "We have a stay at home order. We have to work. You're not working. You should be at home." And I said, I'm on the public sidewalk." And he said, "We're going to get a trooper down here and arrest you." And I'm frankly kind of flabbergasted because I just had a pretty neat conversation with the governor of the
Right.
state of Pennsylvania, and it was cordial, even though we didn't agree. And now I'm getting harassed. So I said to him, I said, "Well, if that's what you need to do, go ahead. I mean, I think it's probably going to be bad publicity for you guys to have a township supervisor arrested on the public sidewalk in front of the governor's home after having a nice conversation with the governor. So if you want to do that, I'll wait right here."
That's an excellent answer. Right.
And so, you know, and so then he moved on to something else and just continuing to badger me. And he said, "You're welcome to leave." And I said, "Actually, I think I'm welcome to stay."
Now,
And
was your intent to leave before
my
the?
intent was to leave.
And so you just was making a point. Then, if I'm allowed to be here.
Right.
So if you're going to tell me no, I'll
leave
stay.
the job when they start threatening my rights, I
Right.
feel like I need to exert my rights. So he's like, "You're welcome to leave." I said, "No, I'm actually, I think I'm welcome to stay." I said, "There's nothing prohibiting me from walking up and down this sidewalk, getting exercise, and carry this sign." And he's like, "You can get exercise somewhere else." I'm like, I said, "Yeah, I'm just going to walk up and down the sidewalk." And at that point, I walked away from them. And as I did, he said something really smart to me. And I couldn't understand what he said. And so I turned back around and I said to him in this tone of voice, I'm like, "What did you say?" And I was still like 10 feet away from him at that point because I had walked away. I said, What was that? What did you say?" And he took that as aggression by me and he ran up to me. And this is what he did. He was like, "Come on, aggress, aggress, aggress."
Are you filming this, by the way, as this is
No,
happening?
I have my voice recorder on, but I'm not filming it.
Okay.
And you can hear it on the voice recording that he says that. And I just laughed.
Yeah.
And I said, "You're a piece of work." I said, "The governor can be nice to me. This officer can be nice to me, but you have to be a bully. You have to be mean. I don't understand." And he says, "You have an answer for everything." And so, the end result was that I ended up walking around the block at the governor's house 30 times for the next 3 hours. I walked 12 miles that day by myself with my sign to make a point.
Right?
If one person wants to protest the governor or any other public official, it is their wonderful right to do so. Now, I will say that later in the day, the third officer who had been watching from afar, she kind of came over near where I was, and I stopped to talk to her. And I just said to her, "Look, I want you to understand, if the other officer hadn't said what he said, I would have left." And she said, "No, I understand that. I'm with you. You have every right to be here. You have every right to do what you're doing. And I respect that. My dad's out of work, and that officer was out of line, but, unfortunately, I can't control him." So, she said, "I'd shake your hand if it wasn't during COVID."
Right.
So, I said, "Well, thank you for your service to our governor. Thank you for your service to our state. It's a necessary service. So I appreciate it, and I appreciate the fact that you've been respectful to me. And it's another reminder that not all cops are bad, but there are
Oh,
bad.
yeah, and that's
You need to hold bad cops accountable."
right. And here's the thing. Even if I would say the majority of cops are probably okay. Like I know cops that are great. I have cops in my family. But the having a few bad apples makes that overwhelms, particularly in a situation like this, because you think about what's going on, and this is something that I've talked about people a lot that say, "Oh, well, if they try to take our guns, we would rise up." Or there's a point, where people will have enough and they'll rise up. And I have a lot to say about that. Not the least of which, well, when's that? Are you sure? Are you sure there's a point? Because we certainly passed a lot that I thought we wouldn't, and there's not a huge uprising. But another thing they'll say is, but look, a lot of whether it be the military or the law enforcement, they're Americans too, and they wouldn't enforce these unconstitutional laws. Well, some would. And the ones that would, even if it's less of them than the ones that wouldn't, the ones that would are the ones that'll cause all the problems. They'll find someone. They'll be able to find a cop to come and throw you in jail because you said something they don't like, if that becomes the order of the day. And you can see it. Not your example is a prime example of that. I saw just the other day, I saw a video of a woman in Wisconsin that two cops came and were screaming at because she let her daughter play at the neighbor's house. Like, those authority figures are out there. The profession, I do home health care. I work with people with disabilities. I have the smallest amount of authority in that I'm a caretaker, and so therefore someone's relying on me to help keep them safe. So it's a little bit, just the slightest bit, like being a police officer or something like that. You would not believe some of the horrible people that enter my field of work that have the smidgest bit of authority that abuse that. I'm in charge here. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. And when I see that, I'm like, wow, imagine if you had the authority to be a police officer. It wasn't just one person that has a disability that you have the power to lord over, but it's the general population. And it does. There are people attracted to that sort of authoritarianism, and this is a chance for them to shine. I've got an order where now people, basically because of the lockdown, if you see someone on the street and you want to, as a police officer, you could be like, "Hey, you shouldn't be on the street." And I'm sure, like I said, I'm not impugning the majority of police officers. I'm sure the majority wouldn't be doing that. But all it takes is one. And look, let's be honest. If that officer would have shoved you or hit you, and you would have done anything that was perceived as being violent back, what do you think the other officers were going to do? They're going to default to, you're the aggressor. Maybe you'll have your day in court later. So that's how you can see how just one jerk exploiting their kind of authoritarian principles could lead to a chain reaction. Now imagine, instead of just you, what if it was a group of 50 people and one police officer got hot-headed? That could start, and I worry that at these rallies and stuff, that's a lot of times I think that's what's happening. They're trying to trigger people. Aggress me. It's funny to hear him say that because you think that a lot of times that's what they're thinking. But to hear some buffoon actually say it out loud, that's kind of amazing.
I tell the story for, one thing, to expose that it happened, but also to wake people up to the fact that, think about the impact that my the fact that I stood up to them, but I did not lose my temper
Right.
or lose my cool. Think about the ultimate impact of that. If I had done those things, number one, I'd be in jail,
Yep.
and there'd be a lot of people who'd be saying, "Well, we know Billy, but that he's in jail, so he must have done something
Yes.
wrong." You know, but this way, I was able to keep my cool. They weren't able to push me around because I had the facts and I had a cool head to present the facts. And afterward, what do I get to do? I get to post it on Facebook. I
Right.
get to talk about it to my friends. I get to file a complaint with the Ethics Commission at the Pennsylvania State Police, all of which I could not have done if I had blown the line and exploded myself. Which, of course, everyone has this internal compunction to. The guy needed to be punched. I should have just punched
Right.
him.
Right.
No, punching him would have been taken away all of the fuel from the fire.
That's exactly, and I say that in my channel all the time, that the way we win is through information and waking up
Yeah.
the masses to kind of the corruption that's occurring in government, but doing so in a non-violent way. Like, violence is never going to be the answer, because what you need to understand is that the authoritarians are waiting for that. I mean, literally, I'm so amazed to hear this story, because this officer put into words exactly what I say all the time. They're trying to provoke a reaction out of you. That's literally what that officer said. Aggress me, aggress me. Like, yeah, that's what they want, because then they could say, you're the bad person. And so, for example, like, it seems like an eternity ago, but the protests in Virginia over Northam's gun restrictions that were going on in Virginia. Right. One of the reasons I thought that it was a great success was they were the protesters were courteous to law enforcement. They were courteous to reporters. They cleaned up afterwards. The place looked better after they left than when they entered. And even though you could say, well, Northam still went on to try to push this stuff, if we continue to act like that, inevitably this big uninformed mass will look at the two sides. They'll see the crazy authoritarian yelling, aggress me, and then they'll see us on the other side that are like, we know our rights. You're being unreasonable. We're going to exercise our rights. And inevitably, that's what draws people more towards you. And you can see, because they constantly, what did they try to do with the rally in Harrisburg? The same thing they tried to do with the rally in Michigan. They're scouring, looking for someone that they could paint as a bad guy and then label the entire movement as that. So in Michigan, they found a person with a swastika. So it was all white supremacists. And that's just not true.
Thing they did in Harrisburg is that they congregated, the day before the rally. The whole Capitol grounds were open, but the day of the rally, they fence off this area and they basically say, "Hey, you cattle, go in that lot."
Right, and
then they point and say, "You guys never social distance." Well, there was no way you could have 3,000 people social distancing in this little area right in front of the Capitol that you gave us to be in.
Right, and it kind of defeats people think that. And I talk to a bunch of people that aren't really involved in politics, and when you talk about exercising your rights like you did, they'll say, yeah, but why do you have to provoke? And it's like, but you don't understand. It's not a provocation. What it is this. Like, take the idea of free speech. There's a reason it's the First Amendment. And when people say, yeah, but it doesn't include hate speech, of course it does. I mean, they define hate speech in a crazy way, but it was designed to protect unpopular, hateful, harmful speech. That's exactly what the First Amendment was. And so if the argument becomes, well, why do you have to talk about the First Amendment? Can't you just go in the little cage they put you in and have your same conversation there? No, because once you give in on that, then they'll infringe in the next way. By the way, that's exactly what I see as the big danger here, as we were talking about earlier. Once we accept, well, okay, we weren't sure about COVID, so we accept the lockdown. Once the population accepts that, it will now become the norm, because I mean, look at what they're getting that they wanted. And this is why I'm down on Trump's response to this. Not because I'm a Democrat all of a sudden, but because I feel he's giving the Democrats what they've wanted. Massive wealth redistribution, massive expansion of the federal government and their budget, giving things like taking away of our rights, erosion of the middle class. And you can see right now the Democrats are out there pushing all of this racial crap, like reparations, Green New Deal crap. by the way, that'll be the next thing. The climate, as soon as a Democrat gets in office, they're going to say it's a state of emergency over the climate, and they're going to shut us down over the climate. It'll be and all of these people that call themselves Trump supporters that were like, well, it was worth it over COVID, we'll have to watch them squirm and say, well, it's different this time. Somehow it's different this time. And so, but just to finish real quick.
With what happened with the Tea Party, right?
Right.
I mean, 2008, you had all these protests against Obama and all of the corporate bailouts and everything that happened during the financial crisis of 2008, the debt bubble that burst, and then where were they? Where'd they go? Where did the protesters go after that? The government didn't change. They didn't somehow become compliant to our wishes. It's the same thing with the anti-war protests.
Yes, exactly.
George Bush's president. There's anti-war protesters, mainly from the Democratic Party, but really from everywhere, little bits and pieces from everywhere. And Obama gets elected, and boom, it's like they're gone. We don't have anything to protest anymore. Like, wake up.
Well, that you're preaching to the choir. That's exactly right. You can imagine them sitting around. Oh boy, these protesters starting to get some momentum here, protesting the war. What can we do? I know what we'll do. Here's what we'll do. We'll put a hip, younger black guy in there. People will like that. They'll like the first black president. Which, by the way, I say that. I don't begrudge. By the way, if you're black or just for the historical nature of that, I don't begrudge that. Just like I won't begrudge celebrating a first woman president. I would never vote for someone based on their gender or race. But I get it. I don't begrudge anyone that's like, it's amazing to be in a country that, we have Jim Crow laws. And so I'm not belittling that. But they knew how to exploit that. We'll put in, so here's this feel-good story. We'll give him the Nobel Peace Prize. And then he'll just continue with the wars. And that's it. The war movement's gone. And then you got the Tea Party. What really changed? Well, we got a bunch of Republicans in there, in Congress, and they were going to do something. And they blew up the budget. Trump's deficit spending just as bad, if not worse, than Obama was. Where's the Tea Party? And it's just, that's one of the things I've been warning Trump supporters about. It seems like a non-story now, but to me, the big issue was government corruption, the corruption from the FBI, the corruption from the establishment. And when I asked this question, and I know this gets me in a lot of heat with people that listen to me, is it worse to have Donald Trump have won than Hillary Clinton if he exposes the corruption in the FBI but does nothing about it? Because what we've done then is, and Tucker Carlson had a great segment on this last night, this idea, we have normalized totalitarianism. It's so normal now, it doesn't even shock us. The police confronting a woman because her daughter was at the neighbor's house, that doesn't shock us anymore. It's like, well, this lockdown, 6 months ago, if I would have said, look, we're going to lock down all of these states, people would have said, you're nuts, you're crazy. Now people accept it with a smile. And I think that's why principles and consistency are important. We might not agree on everything, but if we can't have, if we can't continually apply our principles in what actions we'd like to see, it leads to all of this kind of crazy stuff that we're seeing now, where somehow you could justify that. I have fiscal conservatives that told me if Bernie Sanders passed his plan to give free college tuition, it would have cost $1.5 trillion. They said, not that would be money ill spent. They said that would bankrupt the country. We don't have that type of money. They're now yelling at me when I said, we just gave the government a blank check. They've already spent $8 trillion. Because people forget that the feds put $6.5 trillion in liquidity. They just printed $6.5 trillion. And so where did those people, how do you change just like that? Well, it's because you're cheering for your team instead of cheering for your principles. And I would rather someone be on the other team and at least defend their principles than these people that tell me now I'm a bad person because I criticize deficit spending or I criticize giving the government a blank check or them shutting down the economy. That's what worries me the most about this lockdown. That when you,
I agree, and that's why I hate it when I hear conservatives during this lockdown say things like, well, if only someone in your family had COVID, this would change your mind about this. No, absolutely not. If I died of COVID, it would not change my mind, because this is based on the principles and foundation of truth and that our government is founded upon. It has nothing to do with the circumstances I'm in. It's their eternal truths, their eternal rights. They were given by our Creator. they're not just a position that I can have one day and give up the next.
And it's telling when you listen to people say that, because what they're really telling you is, I just base my political philosophy over what personally benefits me. Well,
Right.
just real quick about me, like, I'm basically a poor person. I have 70-something thousand dollars in student loan debt. Bernie Sanders would have been the candidate for me. Yet I was vehemently against him, because I'm not voting for what is in the best interest of just me. I'm voting for what's in the best interest of the country. And, I did a little video, my friend, it's up on my channel now, it's just 2 minutes. And I was challenged, someone challenged me on a blog and said, if you're going to go to these protests, how about this? If you get sick, you refuse healthcare, because you're causing the problem by spreading this disease by not doing the lockdown. And I said, fair enough, I accept that challenge. My counter challenge to you then is, you've endorsed a policy that destroyed the economy. So how about you send back that government check, right? All those people, if you endorse the lockdown, if you're saying people that are opposed to the lockdown, hey, you deserve to get sick, you don't deserve health care, then if you endorse the lockdown, you don't deserve any government money. Good luck on your own, And
Right.
the thought is, the reason I make that argument is not because I'm advocating that, but because I'm trying to show the hypocrisy that these people have, where they want to make it about, oh, if it was a tragedy in your life, well, then all of a sudden you would change your opinion, and it's not true. And the other thing to say about that is, what does that say? So what if I had an aunt die of the flu last year? And you were unwilling to lock down over the flu. Does that make you a monster? Oh, if your aunt died of the flu, you would be concerned about... You know what I mean? It just proves the stupidity. You're arbitrarily taking one thing that kills us and then saying, well, that totally changes my mind. I completely changed my principles now because it happened to me or it personally affected me. No, my principles weren't built on such a weak foundation that it was, oh, but if something happens to me, then I'll totally scrap them. One of my favorite memes was, the founding fathers, a painting of them like signing the Declaration, and it just says, by the way, if there's a bad flu season, none of this matters. Exactly. So, yeah, I hate that argument too.
And just, full disclosure for the viewers here, nobody in my family has had COVID-19, which I'm thankful for, but I do know 7 people who have had it. I know one person who has died from it. And one of my employees, I have a small company with 27 employees. One of my employees has it, and her daughter had it before her. So it's not as if, I'm just stuck in this log in the middle of rural Pennsylvania and haven't been affected. And,
Right.
oh, if I could only be affected. No, not at all. These principles are, as I said, they're unchanging, and free speech doesn't change whether you're saying what I like or what I hate. Your right to own a gun doesn't change whether you're someone that I think should have a gun or someone I think shouldn't have a gun.
Right.
You still have that right. And we've got to, I'm really hoping that people will come through this crisis, and when they see that many of the government predictions have fallen flat on their face, and that the cure was indeed worse than the virus, that they'll say, maybe we should question government a little more often, and maybe we should put our money and our time behind getting people like Rob Knorr, who's a principled guy, elected, even if it's to be the dog catcher. Let's put Rob in, and because we can trust him to follow his principles rather than just going along with whatever the powers that be tell them to think and tell them to do.
Yeah, and if you're listening, run for local office, run for state or congressional office, do it. One of the things that when I ran, I thought it would be intimidating. I thought, in the special election, there were 24 people that were running. The majority of them had been elected to political positions before, mostly in Harrisburg, in the state level.
Right.
I thought when I walked in, like, hey, they're going to blow me out of the water with this expertise and stuff. Here's kind of the sad truth. They're not more impressive than you. They're humans as well. In fact, many of them are terrible. I'm not saying the people I rate again, but I just mean in general, the higher level politics you get, many of them don't know. You think that there's this air of expertise. There's nothing. There is nothing stopping you, the average citizen, for running. There's barriers. It's tough if you don't have the money, the connections, etc. But as far as the ability to do the job, not at all. You're no less qualified than these people.
that brings up an important point because a couple of people asked me after this interaction with the governor. They're like, "What made you think that you could go down and talk to the governor of the state of 12 million people?" I'm like, one of the things I've learned in politics is that every single politician is a guy or gal who puts their pants on
Yep.
one leg at a time, just like I do, and they have families, they have homes, they have some of the same concerns I have, and you don't need to think of them in some kind of an elitist way that they're far above you either in their talent or in their ability, any of that.
Right.
Wealth, you can have a conversation with any of these people, and if you're a principled person, you're probably a more moral person than many of them are.
Right. And it's something I say all the time. I said it while I was running, and I say it in this show all the time. I think if I ever win an elected position, my favorite day will be when someone, the cashier or the person working at McDonald's, is like, "Hey, Rob, what the heck did you vote for this bill for, you moron?" Because I want people to understand I do not look at myself based on my job or me being an elected representative of somehow being better than you. That is ridiculous. And I'm fortunate, and I truly mean that I'm fortunate, in that I was involved in these two worlds, the competitive world of collegiate debate with these elite, super liberal people, many of them very smart, very wealthy, that went on to become lobbyists or politicians and things like that. And then where I grew up, where everybody's living paycheck to paycheck and they're welders and farmers and truck drivers. And I came to realize, hey, those are the people I love. Not that I dislike people just because they have money or because they're involved in politics. I'm not saying that. But I have respect for the people that could do the things that I wasn't very good at, that were blue-collar workers. And so to me, it's about representing those people. You're not better than them. They've picked, think of it. The Founding Fathers, the idea was, they begrudgingly accepted political positions. Right. They were like, "Oh man, I have a farm to run." Right, but I'll go do it because I respect these other people in the community. They never looked at it as, "Oh, look at me, I'm so important." And so if we had more people that think like that, I think that maybe that's a benefit that could come out of this. I don't care if you're running as a Republican or Democrat. I don't care if you agree with me on all the positions. If you're principled in general, on average, you're better than what's in there. Even if we disagree.
You know, I think that's what draws a lot of people to Bernie.
Right.
I mean, if you look at Bernie, like, I'm completely opposed to almost everything he believes in, right? But if you look at Bernie from just a perspective of his looks or his speaking ability or any of that, you wouldn't say, "Man, this is the Manchurian candidate.
Right.
He has been groomed to be the leader of the free world." No, you wouldn't think that. But because he has an ability to speak the truth and he's consistent for the most part, even if you don't agree with how he got there, but he's consistent within his own principles, that's what draws people to him. That's what drew people to other candidates. And we've got to stop making this a beauty contest and really focus on electing people and putting them in office that are really going to serve the community and their constituents. I'm hoping I'm not messing with this. My screen just flashed.
Oh, no. It's totally fine. The one thing, you're right about Bernie, though. The one thing I'll say is he is authentic in that he believes what he preaches, and he's consistent on those principles. Right. But his principles are hypocritical because he'll say, open borders, but I live in a gated community. He drives a sports car. He has a third lake house, but he's upset about our light bulbs here in Pennsylvania, So, but you're right. That is, look, I said this again when I was running in that special. What was everyone talking about during that special election? That's when the Northam yearbook came out, right? So that was a big issue. And then everyone wanted to talk about AOC. And I despise AOC, and I think that she's hypocritical in a lot of ways, and there's a lot negative to say about her. But she ran for office and won. She did. Right. She saw it. She said, whether she had help or was put there by other people, she took that step to run and win. She did. And so I think instead of just saying, it's your right to criticize. I won't begrudge anyone. I yell and scream all the time. I don't begrudge anyone getting upset or criticizing. But I really think that if you're there and you could, maybe it's just a small local office you could run for, trust me, we need to do something because like we were saying here, it's people in both parties. that keep this kind of corruption going. And I'm glad to hear that about Fred Keller. I'd like to talk to you more. And I'm trying to get in touch with Keller's office to see kind of what he's been saying the whole time. But I'll just close you with this. The last thing we'll talk about here is I think in general, the Republicans are doing a miserable job on all levels of leaving the Democrats control the narrative. The mainstream media is almost entirely Democrat. Academia is almost entirely Democrat. Silicon Valley, like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and then the entertainment industry. And these control our public narrative. Where are the Republicans, for example, screaming about the corruption in the FBI in our leadership? Where are the Republicans screaming about the massive trillions of dollars of spending? Where are the Republicans screaming about and I mean, it's one thing to say, well, I disagree with these lockdowns, but they should be out there being vocal and being a leader and being a voice of it,
But Rob, this happens every time. I remember, I don't remember what year it was or how old I was, but I remember that I was naive that when George Bush was elected and we had a Republican Senate and a Republican House, I thought, wow, this has potential. We could actually get things done. What did we get done? I think we got almost nothing done.
Yep.
And that's what you see. It's when there's not an opposition party to kind of draw them out, it's worse. And then, of course, when they're in the minority, it's bad as well, because then they can just say, well, the Democrats, they control everything. We can't do anything.
I mean, we had 6 years we heard that they were going to repeal Obamacare.
Right.
What happened? I mean, and give credit to Trump. If you remember, Trump came out and was like, hey, let's get a healthcare plan. And McConnell was like, shh, before 2018, before the election, was like, that's not a winner for us. Be quiet. But right. Trump's not really a political calculus person. He's just like, healthcare, there's an issue, needs solved, let's work on it. And that's one of the things I like about Trump. But he's got all these people around him who are like, well, you have to think of the political machinations. How do you win your seat? And I've had people defend. I think Trump's absolutely wrong for endorsing the lockdown like he has. But I've had people tell me, well, yeah, but he's looking at the 2020 election. This might blow your mind, but I'm concerned about our rights being violated in an unprecedented way and people losing their livelihoods more than I'm concerned about an election in the future. How about we do the right thing because it's the right thing, not because it helps you win in the future? So I hope that that's not why Trump's making decisions, but that's the game,
Well, I think that you have that perspective because you look historically at the folks we've had in office, whether they were Republicans or Democrats. The train continues down the track virtually unimpeded towards totalitarianism. Yep. No matter who's in power. Now, has Trump done some good things? Yeah. Has he drained 5% of the swamp? Probably. But there's still 95% of the swamp around, and I think he's still listening to half of them.
Right? And I mean, I remember this is how thirsty people are to kind of see some of this corruption end. When, let me think of his name real quick here. Roger Stone. Remember, there was a corrupt trial, and they were recommending 6 years or something for lying to the FBI. Something that I could prove in 3 minutes that Comey, Brennan, Clapper, all of them have done. They've all lied to Congress or to the FBI.
Oh, absolutely.
Anyways, 6 years, and Bill Barr comes strutting out, and he goes, not 6 years, how about 2 years? And Trump supporters were like, yes, we did it. Our guy only got 2 years. And I'm like, are you so desperate for a victory? Because Bill Barr also is the person who could have charged Comey and Brennan and Clapper for the same crime, for lying to Congress. And he recommended 0 years for them. But right. For Trump's guy, he recommends 2 years. But that's down from 6, and people call that a victory. Oh, man, we're draining the swamp now. This corrupt trial that got Roger Stone. By the way, Roger Stone did break some laws. But the fact that they tried to throw him in jail for 6 or even 2 years is absurd. And that's considered a victory now for the Republicans. And this Flynn situation that's going on now, as well as I do, if push comes to shove, the media and the Democrats and the FBI will coalesce around, well, this Peter Strzok character was a lone wolf, and he's a bad dude, so we'll punish him. But everything's good. Everything's good now. And people will celebrate that as some sort of victory. It's not a victory. And I understand people we're desperate for some kind of win. You're desperate for representation. Again, I can't stress this enough, and that's what I try to say in this channel. I'm not a left-wing person, but I understand that you might disagree with me and you might be left-wing. You're desperate for someone who is also authentic and looking out for we all are in that boat. And that's it's so bad now that any little victory, it's like, yes, this is monumental, and then it seems like we take 2 steps forwards and 3 steps back.
I actually feel really sorry for the Democrats that things have turned out the way they have, and they have Biden as a candidate. And that's no knock on Biden. I mean, I just think he's past his prime.
Yep.
That's obvious in the interviews, and he's not the best candidate. He's got baggage that, with this creepy Joe stuff. And I'm like, good grief. It must be horrible to be a leftist and think this is the best we can do, because and I can sympathize with that, because I've been in that position myself, saying it's horrible to be a conservative and look at who we're putting up there, like a Mitt Romney or John McCain, and say this is the best we can do.
Yep, I agree. And one of the people in the chat say, and this is true, this applies to the lockdown in Pennsylvania. Oh, we're going from red to yellow. May 8th, we go to yellow. What's that mean? Well, you're only allowed to operate at 20% capacity, and only certain businesses in the counties deemed acceptable are allowed to operate. And even if they're allowed to operate, there's still restrictions. Yet you would think it's Christmas Day. Here, people are like, yay! Or how about when people got their Trump checks, right? Woo! I mean, there's nothing like the government collapsing you economically and then giving you a few breadcrumbs to make you celebrate and say, thank you for the government. I mean, it's people like what this person said was, we'll start celebrating when social distancing goes from 6 feet to 3 feet. We'll call that a major victory. And it's sad. They set these conditions, though, because they control the narrative. And that's why you should all run for local office. Do what you can to support actually principled people on the left or the right. I bias, I hope, on the right, but hey, I understand there are going to be people that have different ideals that they're coming from, but if we don't get these principled people, nothing's going to change, and it's going to get worse, as we see.
I agree with you about the left as well, because I can tell you that governance is something that's done in a plurality much of the time. We're not dictators, even on a local level, and so who do I want to be dealing with as we try to grapple with various issues and come to a consensus on what the best plan is? I want to be dealing with principled people, even if they come from a left-wing perspective. I don't want to be dealing with someone who just puts their finger in the wind and says, oh, well, I think this is what I should do, or I think that is what I should do. I want people who care about the truth, even if they, believe the truth is different than I think it may be.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So, well, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for actually going and being principled and talking to Governor Wolf. And also thank you for doing so in a cordial manner, because I think that, look, we all have our own styles. I get that. But I think you made the absolute right decision, that you're trying to get his ear. You're trying to let him know, more so at this point than screaming at someone. I think it's more effectual to show them you're making some errors. Even if I disagree with what you're doing, even what you're doing is convoluted in it. So I really thank you for that. And I'm going to put the link up. I'll get, if you could send me the link to your Facebook page off, and I'll put a video up here tomorrow so everyone can hear the audio themselves to see what's going on. So,
yeah, well, thank you so much for what you're doing. It was great to renew acquaintance with you, and I wish you the best in the future. If there's anything I can do electorally to help you, let me know. I'll be happy to try to do that.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. So that's Billy Allred, everyone. And like I said, I'll put a link up to that audio soon. If you like this video, I know it's a weekend, so there's not a lot of people around, but please like and subscribe. I think that story is really important for people to hear. And by the way, even if you're someone who supports Governor Wolf, I think you were even-handed. You said he acted politely. It wasn't like you came on here and were like, oh, Governor, I think you gave a fair assessment. So yeah, if you could share this, I think it was really good, and hopefully we'll have you back to talk about some other issues at some time too.
Anytime, Rob.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.